Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. And also welcome to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by. This one is a listener suggestion special. So on the One Stop Co-op Shop, we mostly talk about board games. If you're on the video show, you'll see all the board games that are behind me. We love our tabletop here on the One Stop Co-op Shop. But I have started to branch out a little bit. I did talk a little bit of D&D on a previous episode, Dungeons and Dragons role-playing, cooperation to me. You can't do these games without cooperation. And, I got some pretty positive feedback. They said, okay, I'd love to hear a bit more about what else is out there. So a derivation, not a derivation, but like a cousin, let's say a close cousin, to role-playing on the table is live action role-playing, or LARP. And so what I wanted to do in order to introduce people to LARP is to go for the awesomest, the dopest. I don't want to just go to your local, place. No shade against them. But like, if you want to just know what this is all about, go to the absolute best, most immersive experience. And that's what I have done. I've got contacted two gentlemen who are doing a really amazing LARP experience. And we're going to get into all that. And also we'll talk about kind of, developing it and how, the little bit of cross-pollination can go in terms of making all of our gaming lives richer. So let me go ahead and introduce these two gentlemen. They are from the sweltering land of Boston, Massachusetts, here as we've recorded August. Garett and Ken, in charge of the Saturnalia project. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, absolutely.
So we got introduced by Ajit from who wrote the D&D supplement, and I think he's attending with his wife. And he's like, you have to. This is dope. You got to do this. So let's just start from the very, very beginning. I'll start with Garett, who is on the bottom as I record this. Please introduce yourself and talk about how you talk about LARPs in your life and your experience with it.
Sure. So my name is Garett Kopczynski. I'm the lead designer for many of our projects. For this particular project, I'm co-leading with Johanna Peterson. He's a designer in Finland. And I work very closely with Ken and Tyler and Chris Eaton, who are all involved in this project. And LARPs, for me, it's probably the best hobby that I think many people don't know that they have tried yet. I think it's a really wonderful way to meet people, learn things about yourself, learn things about other people. And LARPs have played a major part of my life. I would say that it's absolutely pivotal. And I want to share that passion with other people. I mean, that's something that I want to try and bring more into the world. And that's, why we started Reverie and why we continue working on these like really kind of, really wild projects that I'm excited about. And I'm happy to share a little bit more about, LARP and my history and Saturnalia.
That's what this is all about. We're trying to evangelize here. This is a little bit of a one-on-one conversation because it's a brand new audience. Once again, there are people who have contacted me and they want to know more. So I'm trying to do the best I can over here. So we are absolutely in the evangelizing space. But before we get to the full-throated evangelizing, let's go ahead and introduce my man Ken over here. Same question. Talk about yourself and LARPs in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Ken Pickering, he, him, and I'm one of the other co-founders of Reverie. I'm more involved on world building and operations and the operations side of the LARP itself. I love designing, love working on all that. I tend to focus more on like the logistics of the event and how we make everything happen.
Yep.
So I think LARP for me gets its start in just kind of being an imaginative person, or I'd say like being an imaginative kid, having an imaginary friend and participating in imaginary play. And I think somewhere along the line, we lose sight of that kind of intrinsic imagination that we were all, I think, sort of born with. And so I think like things like tabletop gaming, but I also think like for me, LARP is a huge part of that. I loved theater. I did theater for a long time. And so like being a different character was always a lot of fun to me. And so I started participating in LARPs, really loved them, started writing them and helping produce them. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's a great outlet to be somebody else for a weekend or an evening or something like that. It's very freeing for me. It's a great stress relief to just, I think, step outside yourself for an evening or a little bit, and have fun with that. Have fun kind of pretending to be somebody else for a while. So
Mhm.
I love it, and I think I love creating stories with other people. So cooperative storytelling is a huge. I love, whether it's around a table or at a LARP. It's one of the things I really enjoy doing the most. So
I heard a friend of mine refer to it as full body role playing.
yeah, sure.
In terms of like the, yeah, I mean, of course you can get into like, amateur theater and, a little bit more of a, I mean, I don't want to get into like the denigrating thing, but the idea being that, I mean, this is something that you take on the role and you do it. I
Yeah,
think in like regular role playing games, like we kind of split, right? And sometimes if you get into the wrong groups, it's just like, a bunch of dice rolling and, like mechanical resolution, right? And so the idea of a LARP is to kind of like, okay, we're going the other way here. We are going, we're not just ending the story when the boss dies. We're not just ending the story where we roll initiative or whatever it is. Like, I mean, every single thing in a LARP is, on your feet, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Very, obviously it's written, both it talked about, kind of going through along written stories, but like within that structure, there's a
yeah.
whole lot of room to play. So speaking of the structure, the reason I wanted to invite you gentlemen on, you have an amazing structure that is being developed called Saturnalia. As you mentioned at the end of our show, we did, and I looked it up and I'm like, wow, I wish I was 10 years younger, I had no kids. I would be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So from the logistics side, Ken, tell us a little bit about Saturnalia.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, we've been producing LARPs under the Reverie banner since 2016. But I would say Saturnalia is our most ambitious to date. And that largely has to do with the breadth of the experience. So we're working with an intellectual property. So the V5 Material Vampire 5th edition tabletop game. It's owned by Paradox in Sweden. We got pitched by Night Studios, who's one of the U.S. publishers behind it, to help them produce a LARP. They were getting into Nordic design and collaborative LARPing, and so they brought us in to say like, well, let's do something. And so one of the major things when we first, like, I'd say, stumbled on the project was like, all right, well, where can people be vampires? Like, where in the United States can people be vampires and it be very cool? And we're like, well, like New Orleans is probably, I think, the city I think the most of, and I think it's a city where actually people can walk around as vampires and it not be like a big deal, which is a huge
Interesting,
criteria for
right, yeah.
producing something like this, right?
Like you
But
can
then,
have other areas like Cape Cod or something.
yeah,
There's other they have like traditions of ghost walks and like there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But like in terms of the actual like get ups and the vampirism, and you're gonna get the least likely place to get stared at and stopped by authorities.
yeah, exactly. And working with venues, like sometimes it's very difficult to explain
Mm,
like what we are, what we're doing. There's going to be a bunch of people dressed like vampires there. New Orleans is like, nah, that's cool. That's
yeah.
great. Like vampires sounds good. Sounds good. But yeah, and so but I mean that's been a lot of it is really trying to bring in New Orleans into the experience, because I think that's one of the aspects is that's like the set design is the French Quarter, like the modern French Quarter. And we booked all these venues around the city, but for us it's really doing a very cool vampire experience that brings the city itself and the city's history and culture into it.
So
So
then you're actually using the city
yeah.
as the
Yeah.
set piece. It's not just like going into a room and imagining it. Like, I've seen some really cool LARPs where they dress up the room and there's like a whole complex and there's different rooms with different areas. Like, you get murder mysteries or where, clue type things. That's all things you could do. You using the city. That's amazing. And like,
Yeah.
the French Quarter, if anyone's ever been to the French Quarter, with Berber Street and all that kind of stuff, it's, a lot of that stuff just kind of sells itself, especially at night.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things we're doing is we're bringing a second line in, right? So we're walking through the French Quarter, doing the traditional second line in New Orleans.
What is say what the second line is?
It's the traditional like jazz funeral
Mm.
procession. Where they do it from weddings, they do it for a bunch of different kind of celebratory events. But yeah, so it's like a brass band like walking through the streets of the city. The police will shut down the intersection so you can kind of move en masse through the city itself. So yeah.
And you were the writer or one of the writers, Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of writers. Ken,
Mm.
Chris, many people contributed. We hired some writers as well. And the writing project was unique for how we've approached LARP projects. Normally, not to get too much into the details, but we'd have a more involved process. There would be a survey, casting survey for people who are interested in the LARP, and then we would go back and forth and kind of craft a character that's really fit for them, giving them a full story, connections to other characters, like all that kind of stuff. And that's a heavy lift for, especially even a LARP of like, let's say 40 to 60 people. It's a fairly large project. We're talking like 5 to 7 pages of material per person. With this one, what we did instead was we built this very interesting system that lets you kind of choose your own adventure, where you're developing your character down a tree of different choices. So really you craft the character for yourself in the end. And the writers were providing a lot of material that gave that, seed or sort of, aspect that you could, layer your details on. So yeah, the writing project was a little different. And we also wanted, folks to feel a little more freedom in terms of how they approach things.
Right. So talk about that balance, right, in terms of freedom and, a little bit of guardrails. So like, when I talk to people about this and I asked them, I said I was going to do a LARP. It's like, okay, there's one of the things I want to know. It's like, what are the guardrails of a LARP? Is it just, improv basically, or is there a book? Is there, a bad guy? Is there a plot? Is there a climax and all that kind of thing? So like, where is, what is the state of the freedom and what is the state of the structure, and how do those two interrelate in, a LARP like you're doing?
Sure. Well, so yeah, there's so many different kinds of LARPs, and I think in America, we're usually more accustomed to like one of 2 or 3 primary schools. And say like, you've got the boffer style, and the people who, would use like a foam sword and then, kind of fight battles out. And that would be like the most, common reference point for, I think, the average person for what LARP is. You have Mind's Eye Society, or sort of what's now called Modern Enigma Society, which is troop style, parlor style LARPs, where conflict is resolved with like rock, paper, scissors, and you have like a storyteller and they tell stories. There's like an emerging style called American Freeform. But what we practice is Nordic. And, that's what we set out to do, is to try and make Nordic style LARP. We're not, European, so we're, not accustomed to it except by osmosis. And we, just try to pick up the lessons that we've learned. But the sort of primary tenets of it is that, you're largely empowered to be a storyteller, right? There are rules of engagement, and those are taught in workshops, and people learn, consent and calibration. They learn the mechanics. Everybody works together, and they learn things like how to yes and one another, how to improv, how to like inhabit your character physically. And a lot of those lessons are learned together, in these workshops. And it's a major part of how, especially Nordic LARPs operate. With our LARP, there's no central storyteller. There's, we'll sort of like draw a box around what the experience is and say, this is what it is. You're all empowered. We're transparent about, what we, the staff, can do for you. And there's no, person behind the curtain. There's no, hidden meta plot. You don't come to us for any secret information or anything. And what we say is like, whatever ideas you have, we want you to feel empowered to bring those stories in. So if you're a natural storyteller, that's great. If you're not, you also work with other people to tell stories, and agree with the stories that you're interested in, follow those threads. But it's a kind of, different style than I think in particular Americans are used to. But the aim is to, really lift up people and allow them to, inhabit the stories that are of interest to them. And I know, Ken, you probably have some thoughts to add to that as well.
Sure.
Yeah, I think I mean our we like to make a sandbox, right? Like we set up like these are the themes of Saturnalia. Here's the location and the venues. There is a ritual called Saturnalia, so here are generally the timings, but like it's up to the players as to how they inhabit it and like what they want to make the event. We'll hire performers and musicians and stuff to actually play at the venue, but it's them really creating the story themselves. I think one of the most important distinctions of Nordic LARP that I like is that it almost forces people to work together, because like, for instance, you can't remove someone else's player agency. Like you can't just go to another character and be like, I kill your character. Like nobody can die without their consent in these games. Like it's the way it works. So you can negotiate a scene, and if they're interested in it, let's do that. And if they're not, they can walk away. It's not part of their story this evening. But I think like forcing people to actually, or I would say like encouraging, not forcing, encouraging people to actually like make collaborative stories and actually generate great content with each other, you get really unexpected and I think really really outstanding results. You know, I think one of the most boring things you can do when telling a story is just is something like, oh, your character's dead now. It's like, no, like that's exceptionally boring for everybody, right? It's boring for the person that died. It's boring for the person that did that. It's like, no, like maybe we get into a fight and we yell at each other, and maybe I think about my revenge for a while and I come back in act 3 and, you know, we have a big blowout argument or something. But it's like encouraging those style mechanics of like, it's not about rules and enforcing rules on other people, but it's actually collaboratively coming up with a great plot line that everybody is into. You know, there's a statement, it's play to lose, right? Like when you're there, you want to play that your character gives something up, because that makes great story for you and for the other person. So you're not really looking to be the best, most powerful character at the LARP. In fact, like the people that have the most fun are the people that actually probably, I'd say, lose the most throughout the process and have the emotional connection to that. So yeah.
Yeah, so like that brings me to that cross pollination I was talking about, because we're our channel is about cooperative gaming, right? Our channel is about that's our like reason for being, and like so we're very interested in how one brings about cooperation, because like a pitfall in our side of things is what we call the alpha player. Right. The alpha player is the person who sees all the things and knows everything. And, you know, it's like, okay. And they start to boss around. Right. So like, you do this and you do this. This is obviously the best move. This is obviously where, you know, whatever we're going on. And so it's like, that's a constant bugaboo for us of like, how do we like not do that? And so it's like, talk a little bit about like how mechanism wise, norm wise, you mentioned a little bit, but kind of go into a little bit of a more depth. So is it like restrictions? It's like, okay, there's a bunch of things that you just don't do, or are there specific mechanism things that happen within the LARP that you teach? And it's like, okay, these are the mechanisms to encourage cooperation. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So for Saturnalia, which I'll use as the primary example, because that's, you know, the thing we're probably most interested in talking about. You know, we're working on workshops right now with a designer named Lizzie Stark, and she's great. You know, she's written a lot of different stuff with Jason Morningstar and you know, other game designers, and she's really got an eye on a lot of the, you know, kind of core elements that I think make up a really collaborative, strong one. So the workshops, you know, we're going to review them and rehash them. So a lot of things may change. I was trying to like, you know, get into the like, wait, we don't know what's in there yet. But what we intend is to teach people things like for consent and calibration, you know, what you want is people to trust each other, right? You want to give them the ability to opt out of things that are not for them, and to also be prepared ahead of time for things so that they don't feel like they've been surprised. You know, so for instance, we have an ironclad rule in our LARPs that you cannot touch anybody without any consent, especially from behind, right? You can telegraph, we sort of established like, we'll call it like business standard, right? Where, you know, offering to shake a hand or something, anything you would have in an office that is considered, you know, normed. That's kind of like how we want people to approach it, right? And they can sort of calibrate into other things. We'd say, you know, are you comfortable with like a hug? Right? Those kinds of things, you know, to build up like trust. But what we don't want is, you know, somebody being surprised. So for instance, it can never come up from someone, you know, from behind, even if you really know them and they're like, you know, your best friend, your brother, you know, we don't want someone to feel like they don't know who's coming up, right? Because that consent, especially from behind, you can't give it. So those are the baselines, right? We'd say like something like that, okay? We want people to have like a baseline for trust, and then we want to build up the safety from there. And then we want to engage on, okay, so you want to have a conflict, right? How do you do that? For this particular event, we have two sort of mechanics, right? One of them is the really, really mechanic, which is developed by a designer named Bjarke Petersen. And it's a way of introducing a sort of yes and statement. Right. And it's based on vampire disciplines, which are the sort of powers that vampires have. And it's something like, you really, really want to give me what's in your hand. Right. And the goal is that it would be slipped into an actual conversation. Right. So we're talking and we're like, I really think that, you know, the thing you have in your hand, I think you really, really want to give it to me. And the other person who hears the really, really and they know that something just occurred, and then they can decide whether it affects them or not. And whatever reason they choose, it's totally fine. They're like, yes, that sounds like a great story. I will give you what I'm holding, but it's their choice. And then consent is still at the baseline, and the cooperation and the yes and is all still kind of built in for, how you're going to navigate this. And then for conflicts, we always aim for like negotiated conflicts, right? So some people are totally comfortable, with some preamble, getting into, a wrestling match, for instance, right? And they're like, yeah, you can grab me by the shoulders and shake me around, and you can establish that ahead of time as sort of a negotiated conflict discussion, and make sure that both people have said, yeah, I'm comfortable with this, I'm okay with this outcome. And then you can have a cool scene, right? Because for the onlooker, like most people just see like a fight and it looks like a fight. It feels like a fight, but it's actually not, right? It's been negotiated. Everybody's said, this is their boundary. And then we're also introducing this token mechanic, which is intended to, get people to want to lose, right? Because losing is often like if you're getting into a conflict, like, well, I don't want to be the loser. Why would I want to be the loser? Well, people can offer you a token, and it's during workshops, people will like customize them and, write on them, give them a signature. They're a prize, right? And you get one or a couple. And the thing is, like, if somebody offers you a token, they're saying, I would like you to lose this whatever this conflict is going to be. You still determine how you lose, right? But you get a token at the end, and the goal is to have a trophy, some memory that you come away with, so that the conflict was memorable for everyone. And that's how it should be. I think any conflict should have, a stakes. They should have like something where it mattered, not just happening because. So we're really trying to like build these conflict mechanics and these sort of interaction mechanics around stories, and really kind of like getting people to leap onto trains that are passing by and say, that looks like a good story, I'll go that way. So that's the basis for what we do.
And so it's like the way that a LARP handles cooperation has a lot to do with losing and storytelling. And it's like, okay, where in a board game, it's like, okay, 0-sum, you got to win, and, like losing always sucks in a board game. But like, in terms of the kind of storytelling, and this is where the cross-pollination happens, because there's a lot of storytelling, different types of games. And it should be that more regular role plays have bake that in, it doesn't have to just be killing the whatever. But like, that's an essential part of getting people to buy in. Is like, okay, losing is okay. Or as a matter of fact, there's almost like think of it like a fail forward, right? Is that a good way to think about it? Like a fail forward mechanism?
It is. And, and when you mentioned like the alpha gamer thing before, like those people are not fun to play with realistically a lot of times. And it's sort of a self-selecting ecosystem where the people that come in like that tend to have a worse time because their behavior isn't being picked up by the other people, right? And some of the largest power gamers have actually turned into some of the best LARPers because they understand. They're like, oh, like this is how I actually have a good time,
right?
And their competitive instincts actually kind of flip to like, all right, I'm gonna lose the most at this experience, right? And then it turns into sort of a positive impact of the game. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna keep on. I'm gonna just fail as hard as I can in this direction. And so I find that these kinds of mechanics do tend to kind of cultivate the behavior, like a positive behavior that you're getting out of people, because like communities are pretty good about doing that. I would say if you give them the tools and framework and ability to kind of self-select and navigate that. So.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for that insight. Totally unexpected in terms of what the interview was, but I had to pursue it because designers, everybody out there, fail forward, people. Let's let go of winning. It's not that big a deal. I get the thumbs up from Garrett over there. So I'm going to take a little bit of a turn. This is another reason why I wanted to have you gentlemen on the discussion was the history of it. This LARP is soaked in New Orleans history, right? And so talk a little bit about the integration. I'm interested, and because I struggle with this in terms of my own storytelling and my own, when I run games and everything, like I know so much history and I'm so excited about it. How do I not turn this into just Jason talks about history? Because I'm excited doesn't mean that everybody else that's with me is excited. So talk about the process of historical researching and then gamifying it so that it's fun. I'll go to Garrett.
Sure. So we're not from New Orleans. So we don't know that, history. We don't know that culture. One of our aims, especially this being the South, and especially this, being a place with a lot of people who have been taken advantage of, people of color, indigenous peoples, just not the best history down there. And really
America?
a lot of
nowhere.
But what we wanted
You're in
to
Boston. No way.
Yeah. No, but it was something that we really wanted to emphasize, is that we don't know this, and that meant that we needed consultants. And where we started was going to an organization called LARPing in Color. And we said, this is what we're looking for. We need somebody with historical knowledge. We're looking to really understand, some of these things that we have a blind side on. And, we looked for a consultant. We got a wonderful one named Saraya McDaniel. And they're also one of the writers. So they did dual jobs there in terms of being our consultants, on many things, but also, doing some of the writing for the event.
It's just storytelling by a different color. It's all storytelling.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what we wanted. We needed that perspective. It's one of our co-designers is from Finland. He doesn't know anything about New Orleans, except what he's read. And he's been there a couple of times and he loves the city. But touching history will always mean that you need people who are closer to it. And I think, for us, we're not. We like New Orleans quite a bit. I think the French Quarter is a place that, holds a strong resonance in our heart, especially since we started Reverie Studios because we went to an event in New Orleans and saw the potential of that. But it, also means that we need to do work in order to really make this LARP, this event, representative of the history. And where we have opportunities, I think, we've tried to bring that in. We've worked with a local voodoo ile for telling us, because we do not mention voodoo at all in any of our documents because it's not our place, right? We've basically sort of said, okay, so we're going to talk to people who actually are, faithful, worshipful in that, faith tradition, and say, what is it that we need to do? And started the conversation there. And it's produced amazing results. I mean, we really had some really cool stories that have emerged out of that. One of our events, which is this, LARP that's happening before Saturnalia, is on a steamboat. And when we worked with the Voodoo LA, they're doing a sort of performance, and they basically wrote a lot of material, right? And they sort of contribute a lot of the sort of history and the, ideas. And that event would absolutely not be possible if we hadn't reached out to them and started working directly with them. So history, certainly we touch on it to an extent, and a lot of it is informed through the lens of some of our consultants. But we've tried to, just sort of step back and say, what's more interesting as far as a story that people can read themselves into, and then make it, as broad and accessible as possible. So we're not going to say this is that, and, we're prescribing to you how this experience should look like. We've been trying to just, emphasize this is supposed to be fun, but there are some realities, to New Orleans history. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Ken, but.
No, it's been somewhat pivotal. I think when we first had the idea, Saturnalia, there's tons of materials on it. So we want to do a Feast of Saturn type Roman throwback, but no, handling the city and some of the history was something we definitely wanted to rely on others for. And it's been a great learning experience for us. We've learned a ton of content that we absolutely had no idea of prior to embarking on this project. So
yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the voodoo stuff, because that's the first thing that my friend said. So I had lunch with a friend, and she's just getting into this stuff. She's just getting into geeky stuff, and I'm sitting there going, "Oh man, this is great! I get to say everything." And I mentioned the LARP, and I mentioned Saturnalia, New Orleans, and it's oh, voodoo, or voodoo, right? I call it the voodoo is the more accurate pronunciation. And she's like, "Oh, some voodoo stuff," and I'm like, "Oh, I don't." And so it's that becomes the one-to-one association. So I talk about there's a lot on my channel. In fact, half my channel is about this. It's about the avoiding stereotypes. Right. Yeah. And, as much as, yes, they have voodoo. Yes. That's not a thing that we can escape from. But if we lead with that, then the stereotypes come in, and it's now you've kind of colored the experience with the popular stereotype as opposed to what voodoo really is, which is, as you said before, a faith tradition. a spirituality, a way of seeing the world, as opposed to kind of like black magic and, making people hurt and everything like that. So, I mean, do you have to educate folks, because you have I think it's sold like 200 tickets or something like that.
Yeah.
And 60 more, but 60 more as we're recording this. So go ahead and check out Saturnalia website. There'll be a link in the show notes. So then does that process of education need to happen where you may be getting people coming in that are operating on the stereotype, oh, I'm going to do black magic in this adventure. And it's like, well, hold on a second. So how are you thinking about the process of educating gamers?
Yeah. We're working on documentation for the event itself in terms of like how to handle this type of material. We are working with Voodoo Authentica, which is a shop, and it's like the only, I would say, somewhat legitimate shop in the French Quarter that does this. And they're going to be doing as part of the actual event itself, like supplies. There's going to be drummers. There's going to be people that are like actually actively educating the participants as part of the event itself. And then, the hope is that we've encouraged them to take the same tour process that we took before the event itself. We have a number of things that we're opening up before the event. So as people like to learn more about like some of the elements we're bringing in, they can learn about it before the event. So we're encouraging people to like, hey, like here's a number of tours. You should probably take one of these. We're doing the main venue where we're running has a history with slavery. So we're encouraging, so the people there, the curators there, are absolutely going to talk about that for participants that are interested to walk through the site and actually kind of educate the participants about the history of the home. So like we're really trying to make sure that everything we do like brings the participants in, and so it can be sensitively handled. Or just don't do it, right? Like, I mean, honestly, that's the easier statement. It's like we want to provide a firm foundation education, but that's what it is, right? And we don't want things to be handled insensitively. So,
I mean, it's so like you mentioned before about like slavery and fun don't go together. And that's part, and like in his slavery and class hierarchy and stereotypes, these things are not fun. So, I mean, like, I'm struggling how to ask this question. It's like basically I'll ask it like the straightforward. It's like, okay, in terms of like stepping in it, right? In terms of stepping in it, either in terms of like the mechanical experience, or the storytelling, or if a participant, because it's an open form storytelling. So maybe a participant all of a sudden like comes up with something because they're operating off of their stuff, and it's like, woo, there's some stepping in it that's happening right there. So then I guess like you mentioned before, like you put in as many safeguards as possible, right? And so it's like, is it one of those things where, like, because we also want to deliver an authentic experience, right? So like, I mean, how do you negotiate? Because sometimes in the process of trying to encourage that authenticity, there's going to be a little stepping in it, like, because you don't want the experience to be quote unquote like safe for work either. You want there to be a little bit of an edge to it. So I'm just wondering if there, how do you like, is that in terms of, if I think about it right, in terms of negotiating that, is that something that you're negotiating, like the authenticity part, but then the stepping in it part?
One of our consent mechanics is directly around content, in that like if you think you're embarking on edgy content, we give people the ability, as someone's talking, to like throw out a hand signal to say like, is everybody okay with this? Or what's like a thumbs up? It's like, is everybody okay with this? Right. And people can rate thumbs down, like, and like the hope, if someone throws a thumbs down, you have to throttle off like that's in the material of the game. If it's an intense scene and somebody does that, like it's done. Take a step away, take a breath. And then participants also have the ability to cover their eyes. That's indicative of like they're done. They're whatever this is, they're done with it, and we encourage participants to bring them to ops. We have a quiet room. We'll have somebody there who is a mental health counselor. Like we do bring in people to deal with intense content and try to give people the calibration necessary to handle that. Because it does get real. Like these can be very emotional experiences for people with all forms of content, and so we try to make sure we do everything we can to put the participant safety first and have every mechanism available that if anything gets real, there's an immediate exit, no fault. It's, I mean, one of the rules is it's it's not about you, right? If somebody walks away from a scene, it's not about you, like you as a person, the person, it's about them and their experience, and they're okay to walk away. And there's no, that's it. They're done, and that's okay. You continue with your experience. They're going to continue with their experience, and that's it. That's the end of it, right? And so, but yeah, we try to set that up ahead of time. That's one of the significant areas of workshop mechanics is curating your own experience and how you can calibrate content.
Yeah, if you're for anybody who's just listening to the podcast and not watch the video show, Ken is doing a variety of hand signals.
Sorry. Yeah, I should explain that.
No. It's articulating, like, I mean, because you can talk with your hands, like you give the thumbs up, the thumbs down, hands over the face, and like, the wavy hands, and like, or jazz hands, or like there's all sorts of ways in which there's the acting and the performance that's going on, but then you can also operate on this kind of meta level, I guess. Where it's like, okay, if the experience is going a certain way, then I have the right to opt out. Right. And at any time,
100%.
And it's like, and that is not going to be judged. It is not going to be enforced. Oh, you're ruining my fun by, like we all got to stick together and and which is something that a lot of gaming struggles with. Not just role playing has very much struggled with, oh, this is not cool right now, like what's happening in front of the table right now, in our hobby, like this is not cool, like we are so behind in our consent mechanics of like, and it sounds like LARP has really thought a lot, or like at least your community, and this is not the first time I'm hearing about this kind of thing. It sounds like y'all thought a lot about the safety of the participants and the blurry line between my magic bubble gaming life and how life experience it kind of like infused in that. So I don't know if you have any other comments about that, but I just wanted to like shout out. It's like, wow, all of gaming needs stuff like this.
Well, a lot of gaming learns from other gaming, or learns from other spheres. I mean, my understanding, I didn't invent a lot of the tools we use, it just kind of like begins to circulate and permeate throughout the community. But I understand that a lot of this stuff comes from the kink community, where consent and calibration are very important, and that is, the overlap is you have some folks who started applying that, I think, to LARPs, is my understanding from the historical side. And they said, I'm already familiar with some of this stuff. We'll include it. And then now we're all safer because of it, or at least, a step in the right direction. I think, similarly for tabletop games. I mean, I've heard that there are, sessions now where, everybody has like a pre-session and you talk about like what's going to go on and how it all is going to work, which I think is great, from the perspective of LARP. Because I used to go to LARPs and I would show up, for these conventions, and, it'd be like 7 p.m. and everybody would like show up and be like, now it's on, and it'd be people from all over the place. You didn't know who they are or why they're there or how they play, are we all here for the same reason? And I often found it kind of a little bewildering. This was like, well, I don't know. I'll just try and find the person that I can talk to, and then hope I have a good experience. But when you have like a workshop, when you take time to kind of go through things, I think it really does help. I know it's a little bit of time and, it's kind of boring maybe for some people to sit, and talk about things, but like, it's very important for tabletop, for board games, for LARP, whatever it is, because once you build trust with people, then you can really like get in there. And I think that's important.
I think that's such an important thing. It's like, it's not just about like safer work. It's not just about like, okay, now we're going to reduce down to children's games. Like when you have that trusted consent, then you could do gnarly stuff. Then you could really like hack and slash or whatever it is that the group, that the community has consented to doing, and it could be nasty. And I want to put that message out there that like, we're talking about vampires over here. Like this isn't the, Swiss Mary, whatever it is. Like if there might be some vampire stuff going on.
Yeah.
There's gonna be fake blood. Absolutely. Yeah. There's definitely some fake blood and all that sort of fun stuff. Yeah. Absolutely.
And like, romances and, like they what was that? True Blood or the Charlene Harris books or all that whole things. Like we people have a feeling about those, but I mean, if you notice that's all adult themed and, like we can do that as long as we put in I like to think of it as like, okay, I want gamers to misbehave, but I want us to earn our misbehavior. And I think there's a lot that your community is doing that we can learn how to earn a misbehavior. Now, so there are people that don't want to, they don't want to be there. They just want to do it. It's like, no, then you're not going to have a lot of people that you're going to do it with. Yeah. Because there's a lot of folks that have different lines They're not everybody's the same lines. And even the people that think that like, I'm accepting, they have lines too. They just haven't been violated yet, but everybody has lines. So it's like putting in that legwork in the way you're describing it's so intentional. So like mechanisms, that sounds really awesome. So the more I'm talking about this, and the more it's like, man, I wish I didn't have a 3-year-old. Maybe one day.
There's a really good website called NordicLARP.org. And there's a lot of fantastic contributions there. And it's, everything from player safety, to just different ways you can conceptualize how you tell stories, right? It's a really great resource, and some brilliant people have written some stuff there. So I just, as a brief shout out, like NordicLARP.org, just read some articles, and a lot of people spend time trying to navigate all sorts of different subjects. And I think it's really cool.
So we're starting to kind of wrap up a little bit. Saturnalia is happening. It's happening in November.
November 12th. Yep.
There's still some tickets left. If you want to go to the website, once again, the website will be in the show notes. Is there any aspect of the project that we haven't discussed that you would like to foreground at this time?
I think I'm good. Garrett, you have anything?
Aspects of the project. Well, for me, so we don't get to see much of the LARP itself. As the organizers, our experience is we're usually running around making sure everything's greased and works, and that's important. For me, I'm really excited about the second line. I think this is going to be a really awesome opportunity for people, because you get a brass band parade, and everybody's dressed up in cool costumes. We're going to have some amazing photographers. We're going to move through the French Quarter and then end up at our final location, where we're going to have, performers like, sort of like dark carnival kind of performers. And, it's going to be an atmospheric experience. And I can't wait to just be there. Right. Because I don't get to see much of it. This is the part I'm going to get to see. Probably I'll get to see like the parade. I'll get to see folks, in all their wonderful costumes and, experiencing stories together in the, final location. And for me, like, that's going to be the moment. All right. Just as an observer from the sidelines, like this, oh, great. I can't imagine how cool it's going to be. And that was always their dreams. Like, how cool could it possibly be? Well, it's, the Beauregard Kai's house, which we're using, will be featured in AMC's new Interview with the Vampire show. So, we've picked some very cool locations, I think.
Mm-hmm. And actually, to just take a little bit of a step back in terms of the second line, and you can talk about a little about culture appropriation, right? And worrying about that. But what I'll say is, and because I've talked about a lot of my show, I'm a culture consultant myself, so that's kind of one of my main things is, I think there's a instinct to be like, okay, it's not yours, don't, like, hands off. And it's like, for me, as long as you partner properly, as long as those people are profiting, they're not just like, you're not just like taking their stuff and like you're taking all the profits. Like, obviously, I'm assuming that there's a business relationship.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Everything's paid.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Everyone gets paid. Absolutely. Yeah.
Everyone gets paid, and everyone gets paid. Everyone gets credited.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. So it's like, we're like, and that's where the appropriation is. I think people want to talk about appropriation. Like, okay, well, are you saying don't borrow? It's like, well, no, borrow, but in a way that there's mutual benefit, that there's whatever profits are made, they share in, and they have consent, and they're able to craft the experience on their own. So it's not like you're not telling them, okay, this is what our people need. Like, this is what our community wants. Like, just give us that. They're like, okay, no, do your thing. We're here to experience you doing your thing. So I imagine, Ken, that's how you approach this. Like, okay, we just want you to do your thing.
100%. We look for co-creators, right? Like the whole part of this is us finding great partners to work with. We are in a lot of ways just facilitating a great experience, both in terms of our characters, but also like our entertainers and the people we bring into the project, because we want them to feel ownership of it too, right? We want them. That's the simple truth. We're not a very prescriptive studio, and we know about game design, but like for the areas that we don't know about, we love working with people that know more than us. So because it lends itself to making a really truly remarkable event when you can bring in like a lot of different viewpoints and perspectives. So
absolutely. All right. I have answered all
right.
my questions. It's been real, guys. So we're talking November. We're talking going on to the Reverie website.
Yeah, the vampirelarp.com is the website for the event itself, and reverie.studio is our website.
Mm.
We have Discords for both. We love questions. So if people have questions, they're linked in both of those sites. And we're more than happy to answer any questions on topics that come up or people interested or whatever. So
Does LARPing happen in Discord? Is that just that? Do you have like channels for that? Does they just kind of like pop off,
It
or is it
can.
more?
It can in the pandemic, let me tell you. It can absolutely in the
Uh-huh.
pandemic. But yeah, our preference is physical LARPing. But yes,
Right.
I mean, during COVID, we definitely did some
Yeah.
Discord LARP. So
Yeah. I've heard some people utilizing virtual reality and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
yeah,
they hopped into the metaverse.
well,
Maybe not that.
yeah,
Something along those lines. Yeah.
I don't know if I want to go visit the metaverse and LARP, but yeah,
Right.
it can happen. But yeah, I just want to iterate, like LARP is amazing, and I hope some people try it. They might have considered it and thought it might be interesting. We're, like Ken said, we're always available. We love talking to people. We're transparent design studio, so anybody who ever has any questions, say this is how we do it. We've really kind of enjoyed having conversations with people, and it's really opened our eyes in a lot of ways when somebody's approached us with a question. So,
And I've absolutely enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot. Thank you guys so much for stopping by the show.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, appreciate it.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, later, everybody.